I learned from life that justice rarely comes for free or on its own. Sometimes we need to build our own justice, drop by drop, day after day, with the same patience we use to stitch together a patchwork quilt, carefully joining each piece until we form something greater and more beautiful than the separate parts. Hello, my dears. Before I begin this story that will touch your heart, I want to ask you to leave your like on this video, subscribe to the Grandparents' Tales channel, and hit the notification bell to receive our stories first. Tell me in the comments which part of this vast country you're watching from. I know people watch me from Canada, the United Kingdom, and even Australia. Can you believe it? Now prepare your heart, because what I'm about to tell you today is a story I've kept for almost half a century, and very few people know it. It's a story of pain, but also of redemption. You know, my child, there are secrets we carry our whole lives, buried so deep in our chest that even we don't visit them every day. But there comes a time when we feel we need to tell them before the wind carries them away with us. Today, I've decided to break this decades-long silence. Look at me. What do you see? An old lady of 87, hair white as cotton, hands wrinkled and marked by time, in a simple house in Appalachia, rural Kentucky. Well, this old lady, you see, has a story no one would imagine. My name is Eleanor Payne, better known around here as Miss Ellie or Ellie of the Herbs, because I know every medicinal plant in these mountains like the back of my hand. I was born in 1938, in a time when women had neither voice nor choice, when a girl was worth less than a calf, when our function was merely to obey. First to our father, then to our husband. That was the world I grew up in. Daughter of poor farmers, I helped in the fields since I can remember. I only studied until the 3rd grade because my father said a woman doesn't need education to cook and bear children. I married young, at 16, to Joshua, a good, hard-working boy from a well-known family in the region. It wasn't for love. In those days, few people had that luxury. It was arranged, out of necessity, out of destiny. But I was lucky. Joshua was different from most men of that time. He never raised a hand to me. He respected me, treated me as an equal. We worked together on our small farm, planting corn, beans, potatoes, raising some chickens and pigs. It wasn't a life of riches, but it was honest and dignified. In 1957, I discovered I was pregnant. Joshua was so happy, he went around the neighborhood announcing it, sharing moonshine with friends, promising to throw a big celebration when the child was born. On May 12, 1958, our Clara came into the world, the perfect name for that fair-skinned girl with blue eyes like the August sky and wispy blonde hair on her round little head. Those were the happiest years of my life. Clara grew strong and intelligent. By age 4, she could count to 20, recognized all the letters of the alphabet, and sang the songs I taught her while we worked together. Joshua adored her, giving her piggyback rides, lifting her on his shoulders so she could touch the sky. We were poor, but we were happy. So happy it almost scared me. As the old saying goes, poor people's happiness doesn't last long. On September 23, 1965, Joshua left for work at the quarry, where he'd gotten a job to supplement our income. It was dangerous work, poorly paid, with no safety measures, but he said it was worth it for the extra money. With it, he could buy better school supplies for Clara, who dreamed of having new notebooks like the town children. That afternoon, while I was preparing lunch, humming to myself, and Clara was playing in the yard with rag dolls I'd made, I heard screams coming from the road. I ran to see what it was, and saw 3 men carrying Joshua on an improvised stretcher. His body was covered in blood. A large piece of rock had collapsed on him while he was working. There wasn't even time to call for help. He died right there in my arms, looking into my eyes. His last words were, "Take care of our Clara." The world collapsed around me that day. At 27, I was a widow with a 7-year-old daughter to raise, with no money, no steady work, no support. Back then, there was no pension, no welfare, no government assistance of any kind. A woman alone was seen as a problem, a threat, a failure. The neighbors helped at first, bringing some food, offering temporary work. But pity has short legs. It soon ran out. In the first months after Joshua's death, we survived as best we could. I intensified work on our small farm, planting what I could sell at the town market. Clara, even though young, helped as she could, scaring birds away from the crops, fetching water from the well, taking care of the chickens. At night, I taught her what I could, using the few books we had by the light of a kerosene lamp, because I wanted her to have opportunities I never had. But it was a hard life, increasingly difficult. The drought punished us. Plants died. The money from sales barely bought cornmeal and beans. People began to whisper, saying I should find another husband quickly, that a woman alone doesn't work out, that I was raising my daughter to be a nobody. These words hurt me like knives, but I swallowed my tears and kept going. That's when Augustus appeared, Joshua's older brother. He had never been very present, lived in town, worked as a salesman at a construction supply store, only showed up at important family events. When Joshua died, he came to the funeral, gave his condolences, and disappeared again. But now, almost 8 months later, he was back, standing at my door, a tall man with broad shoulders, thinning hair, thick mustache, a gaze that couldn't fix on one spot. "I've come to fulfill my family obligation," he announced, entering without waiting for an invitation. "A man has to look after his own, and you're my family now that Joshua is gone." Augustus was about 40, never married, which was strange by the standards of the time. Some said it was because he was too demanding, others whispered that he had a strong temper and no woman could stand him. He explained that he had gotten a transfer at work, that he would now live in the nearest town, just an hour's walk from our house, and that he had come to put things in order. I confess that at first I felt relief. A family man willing to help, to protect, to ensure we wouldn't go without. It seemed like the answer to my prayers. The parish priest, when he found out, came personally to tell me it was divine providence manifesting, that Augustus was fulfilling the Christian role of caring for widows and orphans. Clara, however, didn't seem to share this enthusiasm. From the first moment, she showed fear of her uncle. When he approached, she moved away. When he tried to show affection, she shrank back. When he brought a gift, candy, a hair ribbon, she thanked him with cold politeness and quickly put the item away as if it were contaminated. "What's wrong, girl? Why do you act this way with your uncle, who only wants what's best for you?" I asked one night while helping her prepare for bed. "I don't like the way he looks at me, Mama," she answered, her voice so low I could barely hear. "It's different from how Daddy looked." I should have paid more attention to those words, should have trusted my daughter's pure and unfiltered intuition. But I was so worried about our survival, so relieved to have someone to help, that I pushed that concern to the back of my mind. "It's just because you're not used to him yet," I said, kissing her forehead. "Soon you'll see he's a good man who only wants what's best for us." Another mistake. How many mistakes can a mother make before it's too late? Augustus started appearing on weekends, bringing basic supplies, rice, beans, flour, sometimes a piece of meat when his salary allowed. Gradually, his visits became more frequent, until one day he announced he had rented a room in town, but it would be more practical if he could stay with us in the back room that used to serve as a pantry. "This way I save on rent and can help you more," he explained with that smile that never reached his eyes. "And you'll be safer having a man in the house." I accepted, of course. What choice did I have? He was already paying for most of our expenses, had fixed the leaking roof, had put a new fence around the property. People in the community commented on what an honorable man he was, caring for his deceased brother's family. Even the parish priest praised him during Sunday masses. The first months of the new arrangement were not good, but acceptable. Augustus kept a certain distance, respected my space, treated Clara with a formality that, if not warm, at least seemed respectful. He left early for work and returned in the late afternoon, sometimes bringing a small loaf of bread from town for Clara, a bit of fabric for me. But soon things began to change, so subtly that at first I didn't even notice. First came criticisms about how I managed the house, how I cooked, how I raised Clara. "You're too soft with that girl," he would say. "You'll raise her to be useless that way." Then came the controls, how much I could spend, where I could go, who I could talk to. "I'm paying the bills here. I have the right to know where my money is going," he justified. And it was true. He was supporting the house. How could I complain? The changes in his behavior toward Clara were even more gradual, more insidious. A touch on the shoulder that lasted a little longer than necessary, a look that traveled over her developing little body in a way that made me uncomfortable, strange comments about how she was becoming a young lady, how she was growing up pretty. Clara, in turn, became increasingly quiet, more withdrawn. The talkative, cheerful girl who used to sing all day now barely opened her mouth to answer when asked something. She began to avoid being alone with her uncle at any cost, always finding some excuse to be near me or to leave when he arrived. I noticed these changes, of course I did. But what could I do? Confronting Augustus would mean risking losing the only support we had. Where would we go? A woman alone with a child, with no money, no support? Who would believe us if we said something against the kind brother-in-law who sacrificed so much for us? So I kept quiet, swallowed the discomfort, disguised the fear, tried to always be around when Augustus was home, never leaving Clara alone with him. It was a constant, exhausting vigil that left me with frayed nerves, until that day came. The day that changed everything, that divided my life into before and after, that transformed me from the woman I was into the woman I needed to become. It was a Thursday, I remember perfectly, November 1966, almost a year after Augustus had moved into our house. The heat was suffocating, the kind that makes the air shimmer over the dry earth. I had gone to the market to sell some cornbread I had made. Clara had a slight fever, nothing serious, but enough for me to leave her at home resting. Augustus had said he was going to work, as every day. "I'll be back soon, my flower," I said to Clara, kissing her hot forehead. "Rest well, drink the herb water I left there, and when I come back, I'll make a nice porridge for you." She looked at me with those blue eyes so much like her father's, a shadow of fear passing through them. "Come back soon, Mother. Promise?" "I promise, my angel. Before the sun gets strong, I'll be back." I left with a heavy heart, an inexplicable anxiety accompanying me as I walked to town. The market was full, which was good. It meant I would sell everything quickly. I began to serve the customers, many already known who always came to buy my bread. I don't know what it was, Mother's instinct, presentiment, or simply luck, but I decided to return earlier than planned, even without having sold all the bread. Something inside me was screaming that I needed to go back home, back to Clara. The way back never seemed so long. I walked as fast as I could, sweat running down my face, heart pounding in my chest. When I finally saw our little house, I noticed something strange. The front door, which we always left open to ventilate, was closed, and there was an abnormal silence, not even the singing of the birds that usually perched in the pear tree in the yard. I entered without making noise, an irrational fear telling me not to announce my arrival. The house seemed empty, but I heard a muffled sound coming from Clara's room. It sounded like crying, moaning. I couldn't distinguish. I walked on tiptoe to the door of the room, which was ajar. What I saw through that crack froze the blood in my veins, paralyzed me for a moment that seemed to last an eternity. Augustus was there, on top of my daughter, my Clara of just 8 years, with her little calico dress raised to her waist, her face red from crying so much, her little eyes tightly closed as if she wanted to disappear. And him. Even after so many decades, it's difficult to put into words what I saw, how to describe the indescribable, how to name that which should not exist. The initial shock gave way to a fury I had never felt before. It was as if every drop of blood in my body had turned to fire, a fire that consumed everything, that erased any rational thought, any fear, any hesitation. I grabbed the first object I saw, a clay jar that stood in the hallway, and rushed into the room with a scream that seemed to come from the depths of the earth. I hit him with all my strength on the head, once, twice, 3 times, until the jar broke in my hand, cutting my fingers without me even feeling it. He fell to the side, dazed, blood flowing from a cut on his forehead. For a fleeting moment I thought I had killed him and felt not a drop of remorse for it. But he was strong, much stronger than me. In seconds, he recovered enough to grab my wrists, throwing me against the wall with such force that the air escaped from my lungs. "You crazy woman!" he roared, his eyes injected with fury and lust. "What do you think you're doing, monster?" I shouted back, trying to break free, trying to reach Clara, who was now huddled in a corner of the bed, trembling like a leaf in the wind. "Demon! How could you do this to a child, to your own niece?" He laughed. My God, he laughed, a cold laugh, empty of any humanity. "And you think anyone would believe you? The desperate widow, supported by her brother-in-law's charity, against me, a respected, hard-working man whom everyone admires for taking care of his brother's family?" I tried to break free again, to hit him somehow, but he was much stronger. With a quick movement, he slapped me in the face with such force that I saw stars, then another and another, until my knees gave way and I fell to the floor, the metallic taste of blood in my mouth. "This is just a warning," he said, adjusting his clothes, passing his hand through his hair to compose himself. "Next time you try something like this, I won't stop at slaps. And if you think of telling anyone at all, well, it would be a shame if something happened to little Clara, wouldn't it?" He left the room as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just destroyed my daughter's life, my life, everything I loved and believed in. When I heard the front door slam, indicating he had left, I dragged myself to Clara. She was still in that corner, her eyes glazed over as if her soul had left her body, leaving only an empty shell. I took her in my arms, cradling her as when she was a baby, my tears falling on her fair hair. "It's over, my love," I whispered, even knowing it was a lie. "Mama is here now. He won't hurt you anymore." But he had hurt her in a way that no embrace, no words of comfort could heal. And the terrible truth is that I couldn't guarantee it wouldn't happen again. Augustus was right. Who would believe us? Who would help us against him? That night, after managing to get Clara to sleep with chamomile tea strong enough to ensure she wouldn't have nightmares, I sat on the edge of the improvised bed I had made for myself on the floor of her room. I would no longer sleep separated from her, not while that monster lived under the same roof. I spent hours thinking, planning, considering every possible option. Run away? Where to? With no money, no destination, no one to take us in. Report it? To whom? At the nearest sheriff's office. The sheriff was Augustus's friend. They played cards together on Sundays. The church? The priest who praised my brother-in-law's Christian spirit so much? I began to understand what so many women before me had discovered in the worst way possible. That the world was not structured to protect us. That justice was rarely on our side. That we were often alone against entire systems designed to silence our voices. But I also understood something deeper, more primitive, that a cornered mother, a mother who sees her offspring threatened, is capable of things she never imagined. That inside me there was a strength I never knew existed, a determination that overcame fear, doubt, even conventional morality. That night I made a decision. We wouldn't run away, we wouldn't report it, we wouldn't beg for help. That night I swore by Joshua's memory, by Clara's future, by my own soul, that Augustus would pay for what he had done, not at once, not quickly, not with the mercy of a quick death, but slowly, painfully, in a way that would make him understand exactly what he had inflicted on my daughter. Helplessness, pain, humiliation. I just needed to figure out how. The opportunity came 3 days later, when I finally found the courage to take Clara to the only place where I thought we might find some kind of help, Miss Zelda's house. Miss Zelda was an almost legendary figure in our region, a black woman of indefinite age who lived alone in a small house by the river, about a 2-hour walk from town. Some called her a healer, others a witch doctor, still others, in whispers, a sorceress. What everyone agreed on was that she knew the secrets of plants like no one else, that she could cure everything from a simple fever to diseases that doctors in the capital had given up on. I knew her superficially. I had gone to her a few times when Clara was a baby and had colic that nothing seemed to relieve. She had given me an herbal tea that worked like magic. Since then, we had cultivated a mutual respect, although I couldn't call it friendship. I waited until Augustus left for work, took Clara, who had hardly spoken since the incident, and we walked in silence to Miss Zelda's house. It was a long walk under the hot sun, but each step gave me more certainty that it was the right path. Her little house was simple, mud walls, thatched roof, but immaculately clean and organized. The yard around it was swept, and dozens of different plants grew in well-tended beds. Some I recognized: rue, basil, rosemary. Others were completely strange to me. Miss Zelda was sitting on the doorstep, as if expecting us, although there was no way she could know we were coming. She was a thin woman with white hair tied in a tight bun, black skin marked by time, dark eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances. "I was wondering when you would come, Eleanor," she said without getting up. "Misfortune has its own smell, you know. You can feel it from far away." I didn't ask how she knew my name. I had never formally introduced myself in previous times, nor did I question how she seemed to know something terrible had happened. I just felt the tears I had held back for days finally finding their way out. "Come in," she said, making room for us to pass. "The child needs care, and so do you." Inside the house, the air was fresh despite the heat of the day, perfumed with dried herbs that hung from the ceiling in small bundles. Miss Zelda indicated a bench for us to sit on and went to prepare a tea without me having asked. Clara clung to me, her eyes still glazed, her body tense. "She hasn't spoken since it happened," I explained as Miss Zelda put water to boil on a wood stove. "She barely eats, barely sleeps, and when she does sleep, she has terrible nightmares." The old lady nodded without turning around. "The body speaks when the mouth cannot," she responded enigmatically. "She will speak when she's ready. Until then, we need to care for the body and the soul." She prepared 3 cups of tea with different herbs. I could tell by the smell and color. She handed one to me, another she placed in Clara's hands, who accepted it automatically, and the third she kept for herself. "Now tell me everything," she asked, sitting in front of us on a low wooden stool. "Hide nothing. Here there is no judgment, only a search for paths." And I told her everything, from Joshua's death to Augustus's arrival, the months of growing tension, to that terrible afternoon that had changed our lives forever. I spoke of his threats, of the fear we felt, of the lack of options I saw ahead. Miss Zelda listened to everything in silence, without showing surprise or horror, as if she had heard stories like this 1,000 times before, and perhaps she had. When I finished, she was silent for a long time, just observing Clara, who had drunk the tea and now seemed more relaxed, almost sleepy. "What do you want, Eleanor?" she finally asked, her dark eyes fixed on mine. "Justice," I answered without hesitation. "What kind of justice? That of men, with their laws written by them for them, or the more ancient justice, that which comes from the earth, from blood, from pain transformed into strength?" I felt a shiver run down my spine. I knew exactly what she was talking about, though I had never put it into words before. "I want him to pay," I finally said. "Not with a quick death. That would be too merciful. I want him to suffer as he made my daughter suffer. I want him to lose everything he values, his strength, his independence, his control. I want him to be at the mercy of others, helpless as my Clara was at his mercy." Miss Zelda nodded, a small smile forming on her thin lips. "Then it will be a long path, my daughter. A path that will require patience, determination, and sacrifices that perhaps you don't even imagine yet. Are you sure you want to follow it?" "I am," I answered without hesitation. "For Clara, I would do anything." "It's not just for Clara," she said, surprising me. "It's also for you, for the woman you were, for the woman you are, for the woman you will become. Vengeance is a personal journey, Eleanor. Never deceive yourself thinking it's just for others." I remained silent, absorbing her words, knowing in my heart they were true. It wasn't just for Clara that I wanted justice. It was for myself, for my own pain, for my own anger. "You can stay here," Miss Zelda said, changing the subject. "The back room is empty. I don't always receive visitors, but when I do, I'm prepared. He will look for us," I warned. "He won't give up easily. Let him look," she shrugged. "This house has its own protections, and while you're here, you'll be under my protection too." I accepted her offer with gratitude. After settling Clara, who was already sleeping deeply thanks to Miss Zelda's tea, I returned to the main room where the old lady was still sitting, now peeling some roots I didn't recognize. "What should I do now?" I asked, feeling lost despite my determination. "Now you learn," she answered simply. "Learn about plants, about their powers, about how they can heal and how they can hurt. Learn about patience, about time, about transformation. Learn to see beyond the obvious, beyond the immediate. And so began my apprenticeship with Miss Zelda. During the days, I took care of Clara, who slowly began to recover, first reacting with small smiles, then with isolated words, eventually returning to speaking normally, although she was never again the carefree girl from before. At night, after Clara slept, I would sit with Miss Zelda in the yard under the starlight and learn. She showed me plants, explained their properties, taught me how to harvest them in the right moon phase, how to dry them correctly, how to make tinctures, teas, ointments, and other preparations. Each plant has a spirit, Eleanor, she would tell me, holding a leaf against the moonlight. Some heal the body, others the soul. Still others can heal or harm, depending on how they are used, how much is used, how they are prepared. I learned about the black locust, whose bark, prepared in a certain way, causes gradual paralysis, about rattleweed, which in minimal doses causes weakness without killing, about water hemlock, whose poison can be manipulated to cause long-term damage, about tongue, which fishermen use to stun fish, but which in humans causes persistent neurological symptoms when used chronically. It's not just about poisoning, Miss Zelda explained while grinding seeds in an old wooden mortar. Any fool can kill with strong poison. The art is in transforming, in changing slowly, in making the body betray itself, in making the person feel in the flesh what they caused to others. I also learned about folk magic, prayers, spiritual works that complemented the effect of the herbs. Miss Zelda mixed Native American, African, and European knowledge in a unique synthesis, an ancestral wisdom that few understood or respected. White folks call this witchcraft, she would say with an ironic smile. But it's just knowledge they fear because they can't control it. Woman's knowledge, black folks' knowledge, poor folks' knowledge. 3 things the world tries to crush, but that resist generation after generation. Meanwhile, Clara was improving little by little. During the day, Miss Zelda taught her simple things like recognizing edible plants, making small handicrafts with straw, telling ancient stories. Clara followed her everywhere like a duckling following its mother, drinking in her words, her teachings, finding safety in this woman who seemed so different from everything she had known before. She has the gift, Miss Zelda told me one night, pointing to Clara who was sleeping. I see it in her eyes, in the way plants respond to her touch. When she's older, if she wants, she could follow this path. While I learned and planned, I didn't stop thinking about Augustus. I knew he would be looking for us, furious that we had fled, worried about what we might tell. Indeed, we learned through neighbors who occasionally visited Miss Zelda that he had spread the story that we had run away like ingrates after all he had done for us. He told everyone that we were unbalanced, that Clara was a problematic girl with too much imagination, and that I was a hysterical widow who couldn't accept male authority. Some people believed him, of course. He was a man, after all, with a steady job, a reputation in the community. Others were suspicious, especially women who had seen the looks he cast at young girls, but they said nothing openly. Fear and silence were the real diseases of that time, of that place. After 6 months at Miss Zelda's house, when Clara was more recovered and I had learned enough to start my plan, I made a decision that surprised even the old healer. "I'm going back," I announced one night as we prepared an herbal infusion for a neighbor with stomach problems. "Going back where, Eleanor?" she asked, although her eyes told me she already knew the answer. "To him, to Augustus." Miss Zelda put down the mortar she was holding and stared at me for a long time. "Why? You're safe here. Clara is getting better. You're learning a trade that can support you both." "Because he needs to pay," I answered simply. "And for that, I need to be close to him. I need to have access to his food, his drink, his personal belongings. I need to regain his trust, make him lower his guard." "It's dangerous," she warned. "He could hurt you again. Hurt Clara." "Clara will stay with you," I said, having already thought of this. "I'll tell him she's with distant relatives, that she'll only return when I'm sure he'll treat her well. Meanwhile, I'll continue visiting you, bringing what we need for the plan, learning more." Miss Zelda was silent for a long time, just watching me, measuring my determination. my courage. You're stronger than you appear, Eleanor, she finally said. But there's also darkness in you, a darkness that this path will only feed. Are you sure you want this? I am, I answered without hesitation. Some things need to be done, regardless of the cost. She nodded as if already expecting this response. Then let's prepare what you'll need. It won't be easy or quick. It could take years before the effects are visible, more years still, until he's completely transformed. I have all the time in the world, I replied, feeling a strange calm invade me. And each day of waiting will be worth it for each moment of justice in the end. In the following weeks, we carefully prepared everything. Miss Zelda taught me how to make a special mixture using various plants, carefully dosed, that would produce the desired effects gradually, so gradually that it would seem like a natural illness, something no doctor of that time could correctly diagnose. Start with minimal doses, she instructed, so small they won't cause any immediate perceptible effect. Increase slowly, week by week, month by month. The body needs to get used to the poison, incorporate it slowly without violent rejection. We prepared small sachets of herbs that I could easily hide, vials of tinctures disguised as common medicines, powders that could be mixed with food without significantly altering the taste. Miss Zelda taught me how to disguise the bitter taste with strong spices, to choose foods that would naturally mask the presence of our special ingredient. Meanwhile, Clara was getting used to the idea that I would temporarily leave. It was the hardest part for me, seeing the fear return to her eyes, the insecurity, the feeling of abandonment. I promise I'll come back as often as I can, I said, hugging her tightly the night before my departure. And one day, when it's all over, we'll be together again forever. Can he still hurt me? She asked in a low voice, her eyes fixed on the floor. No, my love, I answered firmly. He will never hurt you again. Miss Zelda will take care of you, and I will take care of him in a way that he can never hurt anyone again. I don't know if she fully understood what I meant to say, but she seemed to calm down. The next morning, I said goodbye to Clara and Miss Zelda, taking with me only a small bundle with some clothes and carefully hidden the ingredients of my justice plan. The path back to what had once been our home, mine and Clara's, never seemed so long. With each step, I questioned my decision, my courage, my sanity. Was I really ready to return under the same roof as that monster? To pretend submission? To endure his looks, his words, perhaps even his touches, all in the name of a revenge that would take years to materialize? But then I remembered Clara's little face that afternoon, the terror in her eyes, the way she had shut down for weeks after it happened, and my determination was renewed. Some things are worse than death, worse than physical suffering. The destruction of a child's innocence is one of them, and it deserved a punishment to match. When I finally reached the house, it was already late afternoon. I knew Augustus would be returning from work soon. I entered using the key I still had, and the house looked exactly as we had left it months ago, except for the layer of dust that covered everything, the dirty dishes piled in the sink, the empty moonshine bottles scattered on the floor. Without Clara to care for, without me to clean and cook, Augustus had apparently let the house gradually deteriorate. That gave me a small satisfaction, knowing he needed us more than he wanted to admit. I began to clean, wanting to be busy when he arrived, wanting to appear useful, necessary. I was sweeping the living room when I heard his steps on the porch, the creak of the door opening. "What the devil?" he muttered upon seeing me. I forced the most humble expression I could, lowering my eyes as I had seen so many women do before. "I've come back, Augustus," I said in a low voice, "if you'll still have me." He stood in the doorway for a long moment, studying me, trying to understand if it was some kind of trap. "Where's the girl?" he finally asked. "Clara is with relatives," I lied easily. "Distant cousins of Joshua's who live in Tennessee. I thought it was better that way, at least for now. Until things between us are better." He smiled, that smile that gave me chills. "So you realized you have nowhere to go, didn't you? That nobody wants a penniless widow with a child to raise?" I swallowed my pride, my anger, everything I felt, and nodded meekly. "You were right, Augustus. I was ungrateful after everything you did for us. Clara had some nightmares, made up some stories. You know how children are. I believed her and acted impulsively. But now I see I was wrong. He laughed, a laugh of triumph, of superiority. It was exactly what his ego wanted to hear, that I was wrong, that he was right, that I had realized my place. "And what makes you think I would take you back?" he asked, crossing his arms. "After that ridiculous scene you made, attacking me, accusing me of absurd things?" "I have nowhere to go," I replied, keeping my eyes down. "I'm sleeping in a barn, doing heavy work for almost nothing. The relatives who took Clara don't have the means to shelter me too." He approached, lifting my chin with a rough hand, forcing me to look into his eyes. "And what are you willing to do to come back?" I felt my stomach turn, but I kept my expression neutral. "Whatever is necessary. I'll be the sister-in-law you deserve to have. I'll take care of the house, I'll cook, I'll wash your clothes, I'll be obedient." The last words seemed to please him particularly. He smiled once more, releasing my chin with a brusque movement. "You'll sleep in the back room," he declared, "and you'll have to work hard to make up for the months you left me alone in this house. Understand?" "Yes, Augustus," I replied, feeling a small initial victory. "Thank you for the second chance." He shrugged, already heading to the kitchen. "Is there anything to eat?" "I'm hungry." "I'll prepare something right now," I answered, following him. And so began the second phase of my plan. During the first few days, I was extremely careful. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, cooked Augustus's favorite dishes, washed and ironed his clothes as never before, all to gain his trust, to make him lower his guard. He, in turn, was cautious at first. He watched me with suspicion, checked the food before eating, as if fearing I might openly poison him. Ironic, isn't it? He wasn't completely wrong, just didn't imagine the subtlety of my plan. Gradually, his vigilance diminished. My apparent submission, my dedication to housework, my docile attitude convinced him he had won, that he had tamed the rebellious widow. His ego was too big to consider I might be pretending. That's when I began to implement the plan, first with minimal doses of the special preparation, so small they wouldn't cause any immediately perceptible effect. I put it in the moonshine he drank every night, in his breakfast coffee, eventually in the beans that cooked for hours, and whose strong flavor disguised any bitterness. Once a week, I would leave saying I was visiting Clara, which was true. I spent the day at Miss Zelda's house, telling my daughter invented stories about how things were improving, about how one day she could return, while simultaneously reporting to the old healer on the progress of our plan and picking up more supplies. In the first months, there was no perceptible change in Augustus. He remained the same strong, domineering, sometimes violent man, though not as violent as before my escape, perhaps fearing I might disappear again. It was around the 6th month that the first symptoms began to appear, subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone not looking for them. A slight tremor in his hands when holding a fork, an occasional loss of balance when getting up too quickly, more pronounced fatigue after work. "Are you feeling all right, Augustus?" I asked one day with fake concern when I heard him drop the spoon during dinner. "Of course I am," he answered irritably. "I'm just tired. Work at the store has been heavy." "Maybe you should rest more," I suggested, serving a bit more beans on his plate. Beans carefully seasoned with my special ingredient. "You're not as young as you used to be." He gave me an irritated look. He hated any mention of his age, but didn't respond, just continued eating, not knowing that each forkful took him one step closer to the fate I had planned for him. As months turned into years, the symptoms gradually intensified. The tremor in his hands became more pronounced, to the point where he began to spill drinks when trying to pour a glass. The fatigue deepened, making him return from work increasingly exhausted. He began to have difficulty walking long distances, needing to stop and rest several times on the path between the house and town. "Must be rheumatism," said the town pharmacist, whom Augustus eventually consulted. "It's common in men your age, especially those who've worked hard all their lives." Augustus began taking various medicines prescribed by the pharmacist, by the traveling doctor who passed through the region every few months, by local healers who promised miraculous cures. None worked, of course. How could they, if I continued day after day feeding the disease that slowly consumed him? The irony didn't escape me. The sicker he got, the more dependent on me he became, and the more he trusted me to prepare his medicines, his meals, everything that should cure him, but which, in my hands, only accelerated his decline. In the 3rd year after my return, Augustus lost his job. He could no longer stand for prolonged periods, his hands trembled too much to organize merchandise on shelves, his memory began to fail. The store owner, reluctant but practical, dismissed him with a small compensation for his years of service. That was a terrible blow to him. His identity was deeply tied to his work, to his ability to be the provider, the man of the house. Now he was confined at home, dependent on the small garden I cultivated, on sewing work I began to do for neighbors, on handouts disguised as gifts that some acquaintances occasionally brought. "What's happening to me, Eleanor?" he asked me one night, his voice trembling not from emotion but from the same tremors that now affected his entire body. "Why does nothing work? Why does it only get worse?" "I don't know, Augustus," I lied, helping him settle into bed, adjusting pillows behind his back so he would be more comfortable. "But I'm here to take care of you. I'll find something that helps, I promise." And I continued to help with my special mixtures, now hardly needing to disguise them anymore. He swallowed anything I said was medicine, desperate for a cure that would never come. It was during this time, with Augustus already quite debilitated, that I decided it was time for Clara to return. She was now 11, 3 years older than when she had fled. She was taller, stronger, both physically and emotionally, thanks to Miss Zelda's care. She had learned to read and write properly, knew medicinal plants, knew small charms and prayers the old healer had taught her. "Are you sure it's safe?" Miss Zelda asked me when I mentioned the idea. "He's still lucid, can still be dangerous. He's too weak to be a physical threat," I replied. "He can barely get up by himself. And it's important that Clara sees what's happening to him, that she understands she's receiving justice, that the monster who hurt her is paying for his crimes." Miss Zelda didn't seem entirely convinced, but respected my decision. Clara, in turn, showed herself apprehensive but resolute. "I'm not afraid of him anymore, Mother," she said as we packed her few clothes in a bundle. "Miss Zelda taught me that fear gives others power over us, and he has no more power over me." Those words, coming from a child who hadn't yet turned 12, moved me deeply. My daughter had found an inner strength that I myself was still developing. Perhaps, I thought, she had learned even more valuable lessons from Miss Zelda than I imagined. When we returned home, Augustus was in bed, as he spent most of his days now. He heard us enter and called out with that voice already affected by tremors. "Eleanor, is that you?" We entered the bedroom, Clara a step behind me, firmly holding my hand. Augustus's eyes widened when he saw her, a mixture of emotions passing through them. Surprise, fear. Yes, fear, I noticed with satisfaction. Perhaps even shame. "Hello, Uncle Augustus," Clara said, her voice clear and firm, without the slightest tremor. He looked away, unable to face those blue eyes that certainly silently accused him. Did the relatives allow her to return?" he asked, addressing me, avoiding looking directly at Clara. "Yes," I replied simply. "I thought it was time. Clara missed me, and I missed her." He didn't respond, just nodded, his eyes fixed on his own trembling hands, resting on the blanket. From that day on, a new dynamic was established in our house. Clara helped with household chores, tended the garden with me, occasionally watched as I helped Augustus with basic tasks like eating, dressing, bathing. She never stayed alone with him, not out of fear now, but by choice. At night, after Augustus slept, often with the help of a calming tea I prepared, Clara and I would talk in low voices in the kitchen or on the porch under the stars. "Is he dying, Mother?" she asked me one of those nights, some months after her return. I considered lying, protecting her from the complete truth, but decided she deserved honesty. "Not exactly, my flower. He's changing. His body is gradually failing, but his mind remains good. He's feeling in his skin what it means to be trapped, helpless, at the mercy of others." Clara was silent for a long time, processing my words, understanding their implications. "It's like what Miss Zelda talks about balance," she finally said. "Each action generates an equal reaction. Each evil eventually returns to the one who caused it." "Yes," I agreed, amazed at her premature wisdom. "That's exactly it." The years continued to pass, and Augustus's condition progressively deteriorated. By the 5th year of my return, he could no longer walk by himself, needing help even to go from the bedroom to the living room. His arms, though still functional, had lost most of their strength, barely able to hold a spoon without spilling the contents. His speech began to be affected, words coming out slurred, sometimes incomprehensible. I began to bathe him, to dress him, to feed him by mouth as one does with a small child or a very debilitated elderly person. And in each gesture of apparent care, I whispered in his ear, "Are you enjoying being trapped in this body, Augustus? Depending on others for everything? Having no control over anything? Being touched without being able to refuse?" This is how Clara felt that day. Helpless, violated, without choice. His eyes would stare at me with anger, with fear, with understanding, finally, of what was happening. But what could he do? Who would believe a sick, possibly delirious man against the dedicated sister-in-law who cared for him with such selflessness? I became known in the region as an example of my altruism, my Christian charity. "Mrs. Eleanor is a saint," the neighbors would say, to care for her brother-in-law for so long with such dedication. If they only knew the truth. Clara grew strong and healthy despite everything she had been through. She was a serious teenager, mature beyond her years, with a knowledge of medicinal plants that rivaled my own. She began to help me in my small home remedy business that now supported our household, since Augustus could no longer work. At some point in the 7th year, when Clara was already 15, I made a decision. "I think it's time to tell her the complete truth," I said to Miss Zelda during one of my regular visits. "About what we're doing, about how we're really treating Augustus." The old healer, now even more wrinkled, her hair completely white, looked at me with those eyes that seemed to see through the soul. "Are you sure? It's a heavy burden to place on a young woman's shoulders." "She already knows in a way," I replied. "She's too intelligent not to have connected the dots. And I think she deserves to know she's receiving justice, that we're not just watching a natural disease take its course." Miss Zelda nodded slowly. "Perhaps it is indeed time. But be careful with the words you choose. There's a fine line between justice and vengeance, between strength and cruelty. Clara is forming her worldview now, and you are her main model." That night, after Augustus was soundly asleep, I called Clara to the porch. The moon was full, illuminating the yard with its silvery light, creating elongated shadows of the trees and bushes. "I need to tell you something important," I began, sitting beside her on the wooden bench that Joshua had made so many years ago, one of the few things that still remained of him. "About Uncle Augustus?" she asked, always perceptive. "Yes," I confirmed. "About his illness, which isn't really an illness." Clara remained silent, waiting for me to continue. She didn't seem surprised. "Remember when we stayed at Miss Zelda's house after we fled from here?" I asked, though I knew she remembered. "You probably didn't know at the time, but while you slept, I learned things from her. Things about plants, about their powers, about how they can heal and how they can cause other effects." Clara continued in silence, her eyes fixed on mine. "When I came back here, to this house, I brought with me specific knowledge, and I also brought certain ingredients, certain mixtures that Miss Zelda taught me to prepare." "You're poisoning him," she finally said, not as a question, but as a confirmation of something she already knew. "Not to kill him," I quickly clarified, "to transform him, to make his body gradually fail while his mind remains aware, so that he experiences what it's like to be trapped, helpless, with no control over his own destiny, so that he feels in his skin what he made you feel that day." Clara absorbed my words, her face serious, contemplative. "So that's why you put that powder in his food and medicines?" She really knew, or at least had suspected for some time. "Yes," I admitted. "It's a special mixture made with knowledge few have. It acts slowly, without killing, just transforming." "It's working," she observed. "He can barely move now, needs help for everything." "That was the goal," I confirmed. "I didn't want him to die quickly. That would be too merciful. I wanted him to really understand what it means to have control taken away from you, to have your body used against your will." Clara was silent for a long time, just looking at the full moon. When she finally spoke, her voice had a maturity that surprised me. "Miss Zelda told me once that justice without compassion becomes just another form of cruelty, that we should seek balance, not just vengeance." I felt something strange in my chest, shame, doubt, I couldn't say. "Do you think I've gone too far?" I asked, genuinely interested in her response. She considered the question carefully before answering. "I don't know, Mother. He did something terrible, something unforgivable. He deserves punishment. But I also wonder how long this punishment should last. When is it enough? When does justice transform into something else, darker?" I had no answer to these questions. They were the same ones that occasionally haunted me on sleepless nights. When I would lie listening to Augustus's moans of pain in the next room. When I began, I was so certain, so sure of the justice of what I was doing. But now, seeing that wisdom in my daughter's eyes, something inside me began to change. "You're right, my daughter," I finally replied. "There's a line that divides justice and vengeance, and perhaps I crossed that line a long time ago. But I don't know how to stop anymore." Clara took my hands between hers, the hands of a young woman who already knew so much of life's harshness. "We can find a path together, Mother," she said. "Not to forgive him, never that, but to free ourselves." In the following weeks, I gradually reduced the doses of the preparation in Augustus's food. Not enough for him to improve. The damage was already permanent, but at least so that he wouldn't get worse more rapidly. Clara, in her silent, observant way, began to help in caring for him, not out of affection or forgiveness, but from a greater understanding than I myself could have at that moment, that becoming like him, cruel and merciless, would be the true defeat. In the 10th year after my return, when Clara was already 18, Augustus was completely incapacitated. His once strong and domineering body was now just a prison of inert flesh. The only cruelty that remained was his mind, perfectly lucid, imprisoned in that body that no longer obeyed, a punishment that I belatedly realized was perfectly suited to his crime. It was during this time that Miss Zelda fell ill. At almost 90, her tired body was finally beginning to fail. Clara and I spent whole days caring for her, returning a fraction of what she had done for us. "You did what you needed to do, Eleanor," she told me on one of her last days, her voice weak but still carrying that ancestral wisdom. "Don't blame yourself for protecting your daughter, but remember that true vengeance is not making the other suffer, it's living well despite them." Miss Zelda departed on a full moon night, exactly as she had predicted. She left her house and her knowledge to us, her spiritual heirs. When we returned from the funeral, we found Augustus dead too. The neighbor we hired to care for him in our absence said he simply stopped breathing in his sleep. There was no suffering, no drama, just a silent end to a life that had caused so much harm. Looking at his lifeless face, I felt a strange emptiness. There was no more anger or satisfaction in his death, just relief, as if a weight I didn't even know I was carrying had finally been removed from my shoulders. We had a simple burial. Some neighbors appeared, more out of curiosity than mourning. The priest gave a generic sermon about divine mercy. No one besides us knew the truth about who he really was, about what he had done, about how he had paid for his crimes. After his death, Clara and I moved permanently to Miss Zelda's house. It was a new beginning, free from the shadows of the past. Clara assumed the role of local healer. Her gift was undeniable. I helped her, but increasingly, it was she who led, who received people seeking healing, advice, comfort. With time, Clara married a kind young man from the region. They had children who grew up hearing stories about plants, about cures, about respect for nature and for the weaker. We never told them the complete story about their great-uncle Augustus. Some stories don't need to be perpetuated. As for me, I never married again, not out of bitterness or distrust, but because I already had everything I needed. My daughter, my grandchildren, my knowledge, my peace. And perhaps, in some strange way, Augustus taught me my most valuable lesson, that true strength isn't in dominating, controlling, hurting, but in resisting, surviving, transforming. Today, at 87, sitting on this porch, sharing this story for the first time in almost half a century, I can't say whether what I did was right or wrong. I don't know if the justice I sought was really achieved or if I just created another form of violence. All I know is that I protected my daughter the only way I could in the world that existed at that time. And if you're listening to this, perhaps it's because you need to hear that sometimes we have to fight with the weapons we have, not with the ones we wish we had. That sometimes the world doesn't offer clean exits, perfect choices. That sometimes all we can do is the least worst and move forward, carrying our scars with dignity. This was my story, the truth I kept for so many decades. A story of pain, yes, but also of redemption, of how a simple woman from the mountains, with no formal education, no power, no voice, found ways to survive, to protect her own, to build her own justice in a society that closed its eyes to the suffering of women and children. I don't share it as an example to be followed, but as testimony of a different time, of impossible choices, of tortuous paths we are sometimes forced to travel. And now that you know it, it's yours too. Thank you for listening, my dears. If you liked this story, don't forget to leave your like on this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to receive our stories first. Tell me in the comments what you thought of this real story from my life. Until next time.